I'm delighted to have our group of speakers here today. And our first speaker is Ben Grant. And I have been a fan of Ben's for several years. I followed him on Instagram and Facebook, and I bought his books. I've also watched a couple of his TED Talks. He has an incredible eye for impactful imagery. And as a visual learner, I so greatly appreciate that. And in October, I decided what the heck, I'd love to meet him and hear more about what he's doing. So I basically cold called or cold emailed him. And to my surprise, he responded. We had a great conversation. And somewhere along the way, I asked if he would speak to us. And I'm so very grateful that he agreed. So a couple of biographical notes. He's from Philadelphia originally, now lives in San Francisco. He went to Yale and was working as a brand strategy consultant when he started Daily Overview in his spare time. I believe the genesis was in sharing on social media interesting satellite images to which he had access. And this led to a very large following, which led to the books and speaking engagements and his work for the past 7+ years. And so with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Ben, and you can share your screen.
Thank you so much, Tom. And really an honor to be here with you all this morning. I wish it could be in person, but hopefully next year we'll all be back together somewhere indoors. So let me pull up my slides here. Great. Just a thumbs up from everyone if that looks okay. Yeah. All right, fantastic. So as Tom mentioned, I am the founder of Overview, a project I started in 2013. The project and that word even was inspired by this idea known as the overview effect. This phrase, this idea was coined by science writer Frank White in 1987, after he had this kind of profound idea or opportunity to speak with a number of astronauts who went to outer space, who went to the International Space Station, and they all came back reporting this awakening, this change in perspective after they saw views like this, traveling around the Earth, floating from above. And they came back with this new idea of what it meant to be a human being, what it meant to be alive, what it meant to call the Earth home. As Tom mentioned, I was working as a consultant at the time in New York City, and I started a space club at this consulting firm, which is why this happened. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring people together and talk about something different than our everyday today branding work. So someone sent me a film about the overview effect, which is actually where those shots are pulled from. But I was preparing these talks for Space Club every so often, thinking about different ways to introduce new ideas into this community. And one day I was walking around New York City and I looked down at my phone and there's that blue dot that shows you exactly where you are because of GPS. And I figured, oh, why don't I do a talk about satellites? And figured I would give a little bit background about satellites and the satellite industry. And we all have access to incredible mapping programs on every computer now with Google Earth or Apple Maps, like you can see here on my screen. And I figured I would just share a few images from Apple Maps, just of the planet captured from above. So when I opened up Apple Maps on my computer that day in 2013, you get this prompt when you go on to any of these programs.
Hold on.
Sounds like someone is unmuted. So it asked me to search for a place or an address. And because I had just learned about the overview effect, it was so profound and so much on my mind, it was my instinct that day to type in Earth and to do a search for Earth, thinking it would zoom out and give us that blue marble view that we're so familiar with. To my surprise, however, on that day when I pressed enter and search for Earth, it zoomed in. And this is what I saw on my screen. This is Earth, Texas, which is a small town in northern Texas, the only town in the United States and perhaps even the world called Earth. And it was my instinct, as you can see here on the screen, to start composing the image and zoom in and try to figure out what these circles were. Turns out they're pivot irrigation fields, which is a way to water crops with a central line of sprinklers that rotate around the middle. But I was doing a lot of painting at the time and a lot of photography, and I thought this looks more like a painting than a photograph. And that's kind of how that composition process started. And this image set me off on this adventure to focus on the places where humans are impacting the planet. Where are these particular areas where I can create this mesmerizing view that tells this deeper story. So this image inspired me to start Daily Overview. The idea was to create one of these pictures every day, post it on social media, and just give a quick 3 or 4 sentence description about what you are seeing in the image. So just to give you a taste of some of my images and the body of work that's been created over the past 7 years, here are just a few examples. So this overview shows deforestation in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. What you can see there is the untouched rainforest on the right side of your screen, and the area that has been cleared for agriculture and cattle ranching on the left side of your screen. I love this image because it forces you to contemplate the importance of natural resources in the area of nature, or in the intersection of nature that has to be cleared to feed people and to stimulate economies in countries where this is the only source of the ability to do so. This is the Mount Whaleback iron ore mine in the Pilbara region of Australia. So an incredibly beautiful yet scary scar on the face of the earth. You're seeing mined iron ore, 98% of which is used to create stainless steel. So think about your dishwasher, appliances, the construction of buildings, all starts at a place like this. Thinking about where we get our energy from, this is a particularly advanced, more renewable form of energy creation. This is a solar concentrator in Seville, Spain. So what you're seeing are thousands of mirrors arrayed in concentric circles, all pointing towards this tower at the center, which is about 100 meters tall. At the top of this tower, there's molten salt, which gets heated by the light reflected upwards from the mirrors below. That heat creates steam, which spins turbines and generates electricity for tens of thousands of homes in the Seville area. I pulled this example in because I think it's a particularly compelling one and telling one of the insights that can come from satellite imagery. This is just in the Bay Area. What you're seeing here is Palo Alto and Atherton on the right side of the screen, and East Palo Alto on the left side of your screen. So thinking about wealth and being able to understand where wealthier areas are in correlation to the amount of trees and green space. Just a pretty interesting example that they're right next to each other. But thinking about, what can we learn about the places we live when we look at them from above? I just love the visual of this one. This is Singapore, the port of Singapore. So container ships and oil tankers waiting outside the entry to the port, one of the largest facilities of its kind in the world. And wanted to today kind of give some of the technical background about how these images are possible and how I make them. So when the project first started, I was pulling these images from the public domain and doing a bit of photoshopping and getting permission from a satellite company to do so. As the project has progressed and there's been commercial opportunities, I've developed contracts with 4 private companies, Maxar, Nearmap, Airbus, and Planet, which have different elevations and different resolutions accordingly on their cameras. Some are satellites. Nearmap is an aerial imaging company that uses airplanes with cameras affixed to the bottom of the aircraft. And then 2 government organizations that we all know, the European Space Agency and NASA. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are actually familiar with this information. Most people I speak to are not. But what does 30 centimeter satellite imagery mean? That means that 1 pixel on your screen equals 30 centimeters on the ground. So to translate that into an interesting example, this is a Maxar, this is a Maxar image of the Bay Area captured from above the Pacific Ocean, approximately 800 miles away. So instead of pointing straight down, they have the ability to take this shot from an incredibly low angle, low off nadir it's called. But the resolution is absolutely stunning, as you can see. Just so you know where I am, that's where I am today in San Francisco, just for a little zoom. But the resolution on these cameras is so good that you could take a picture of a beach ball on the Golden Gate Bridge from Los Angeles. So it's absolutely incredible. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about. But I've wanted to point those cameras in the direction of the places where humans are impacting the planet, and hopefully have created a compelling story in the process. So just to give some examples about how I think about creating these images. As I mentioned before, I was doing a lot of painting and photography in New York City when I started the project, which I think is why it got me thinking that these are something more than just pieces of data, that these are pieces of art potentially. And just a few examples. So this cattle feedlot in Texas with its separating lines looks a lot like my favorite artist, Pete Mondrian, and his grid paintings. Ipanema Beach, seen here in Brazil with the beach going right down the center, looks a lot like a Barnett Newman strip painting. Deforestation here in Bolivia looks a lot like an Ellsworth Kelly block painting. And last but not least, Lake Mead, just outside of Las Vegas, looks a lot like a Clifford Still painting. And Clifford Still was a painter who was in many ways attempting to depict the craggy American West landscape in this abstract way. And I often joke that I wish I could bring him back to life and show him this comparison and say, you were doing just that. You were doing a very good job. So I think this is an interesting moment to talk about these images from a map perspective. I often post one of these images on social media, and if it's a city that people live in or they're familiar with, they tell me, oh, this image is upside down, or this image is incorrectly positioned. And what they're saying is, this is not north oriented, like we're so used to when we look at maps. And I never considered these images to be, maps in the classic sense of the word. I was always trying to find the best orientation possible to create the best artistic aesthetic appearance and experience for the viewer. Some of these examples I just showed, I think are good examples. If you looked at the compass rose on all of these examples, they wouldn't necessarily be, there wouldn't necessarily be any rhyme or reason to it, but just figuring out what looks like a painting or what creates that experience for the viewer has always been my first focus. So I always love that example when someone says that's upside down, and sometimes I like to reply and say, what is upside down from outer space? So just some examples about how the project has gone out into the world and how I've been, so fortuitous and lucky to take this beyond the screen and to some interesting examples. But first, starting on the screen, as Tom mentioned, the project really took hold and became popular on Instagram. This is what you would see if you search for the project on Instagram. There are now more than 1 million people who follow every day. And just to give an example here, I'm going to click on Venice. While the image is always the first thing you see, and it's important to use that kind of visual to get people's attention, there's always the caption there that follows to give people a greater explanation of what they're seeing within the frame. This is an example I created recently, just experimenting with video. There's such incredible resolution in these images that you can bring them to life in this way using the Ken Burns effect, as it's called, just kind of moving within a still image. This is San Francisco Airport. So starting on a plane, and this secret hidden little Easter egg in the satellite imagery here. If you zoom in on San Francisco Airport, the taxi line is kind of secretly visible from above. I'm not sure why they designed it like that, but there you go. And then something cool that I experimented with on Earth Day for the first time ever, we did our first impact post. So I found an incredible sponsor, a good friend from a company called Harbor that sponsored this, but every like on the post went towards planting a tree at an agroforestry in Haiti. So looking to use the platform in new and interesting ways, we planted 111,002 trees last week on Earth Day. So thinking about how these platforms can connect to the project and be used in a more compelling and impactful way. We have a website where the images are not only available for purchase, but you can go to something like our index seen here. Every single image that's ever been posted is sorted and available with the geo coordinates if people want to go and explore on their own mapping programs. I love that it's also searchable by different themes, so cities, transportation, mining, etc. Sometimes we have the opportunity to go into a bit more detail about a particular story. So this one is an example of how airfare and air travel was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, looking to see where planes have been stored that aren't in the sky, looking at where rental cars have been parked, et cetera, et cetera. So going beyond just a single image and looking at something a bit more holistically. This is something cool that I've been experimenting with. I haven't shown this to too many people, but we posted it on the feed last week. And this is a collaboration with another amazing aerial photographer, George Steinmetz, who's a National Geographic legend who's been doing this from his paraglider and drones for years. What you're seeing here is a shrimp pond in Indonesia. And this is his image, and then it morphs into my image, which is something I'm super excited about. Kind of this 1 + 1 = 3 idea, where you get the context on the ground of what is in each of these ponds, and then you go to a level that's way beyond something that can be seen by a drone to show kind of the full scale of this operation. So I'm excited to see where that collaboration might lead the work in the future. These images are available for sale, which is exciting. It's something which when I started the project, I never imagined that I would make any money off of it, but people started asking me if I could create a print out of certain images, and I figured out a way to do that. And we now have more than 100 images for sale, and these can be printed really large, which is always very immersive and exciting. Something new that I launched just recently last year is what we call the custom print creator. So I've kind of removed myself from the equation, but people can search for anywhere in the world, pick the size of the image that they want, kind of create it themselves. And ultimately what you'll see here after this person fills in this form is when you create an image, it will get sent back to you for your approval like this. And then you can review it, see if you like it. And you know, it's been so cool to see people creating images of where they grew up or where they got engaged, and kind of looking at the world beyond just necessarily the most beautiful places, but thinking about the most meaningful places. It's been amazing to see the project have these digital installations in the world. This is in Barcelona in a office building lobby. So you can see the images come to life there on a huge scale. And again, always important to have the context and geo coordinates so people can see what the image is and where it is. This is an exhibition I've done in Sweden the last 4 summers. It fits into this shipping container and can travel and be mobile. We've always done the exhibition in town squares, not behind the doors of exclusive galleries, so anyone can stumble upon it. There's translations in 3 languages if there are people traveling there from other countries. And yeah, just thinking that these images, these maps, as you want to call them, are really accessible to all ages, people who don't necessarily have an art historical background, and just an opportunity to learn more about the world and be a bit more inquisitive about how we're impacting it. This is a mural that I did at a Facebook office in Sausalito, California. Just wanted to show this to speak to the power of again, the cameras and the potential here. This mural is 35 feet long and was printed in 300 DPI. So just an absolutely enormous file. I think the file was like 15 gigabytes. But again, this is kind of bringing to life the true potential of this imagery. Was so incredible to install this and see, everyone from the security guard of the office to one of the engineers to the head of the office all go up to the wall and figure out, where they live or where they've traveled, or just started this incredible conversation. So it was so cool to bring that to life. And as Tom mentioned, I've been lucky to do a few books now. This was my first book, Overview, that came out in 2016. And what I wanted to mention here is just staying true to the project and staying true to the idea. The chapters of this book were sectioned accordingly based on these different themes of how humans are impacting the planet. So where we harvest is all food, where we extract is all mining, where we live, cities and residential development, et cetera, et cetera. And it was amazing to see that book take hold. It's been translated now into 9 languages and was also adapted to be a Young Explorers edition. So a book targeted towards middle school students, making the ideas and the stats and the concepts a bit more accessible for a younger audience. And then just this past year, came out with my most recent book, Timelapse, And as you might imagine, with these satellite companies, they've amassed this incredible archive. This is an example from Timelapse, a San Francisco-based company. But when you go to a spot, this is Earth, Texas, fittingly from the place in the beginning, you can look at that area and see how it's changed on a monthly basis, even day to day. And I think the challenge of Timelapse was to go into these incredibly vast, expansive archives and figure out what were the most powerful examples, like kind of the golden nuggets that show what is going on the planet today. What is the story of change right now? And the book is broken down into 3 different sections, and I'm just going to share a few examples, not too extensive, because I want to leave some time for Q&A from each of the sections to give you an idea of what that story is. So the first is civilization. So the world that we live in, the world that we're moving within, the world in which we consume things. So thinking about urbanization to start, this is the city of Las Vegas, captured here in 1989, the year that I was born. So over the course of my lifetime, the city of Las Vegas, the population has quadrupled from about 700,000 to more than 3 million today. And I can do that one more time. You can see the sprawl that has occurred accordingly to accommodate that larger population. Thinking about transportation, so this section of farmland in a few small villages was located outside the city of Beijing, 2012. That exact area became a construction site and now is the world's largest single terminal airport, the new Beijing Daxing Airport. I believe the square footage is about 1 million square meters. The floor plan of this building. So I think as travel gets back to normal, this is a facility that will soon be accommodating about 75 million people and passengers every year. Moving into utilization, which is the second section of the book. Thinking about all of the natural resources that we make use of to make civilization possible. So the 3 sections are water, land, and raw materials. Thinking about water first, this is the Aral Sea, which used to be, I believe, the 3rd or 4th largest lake in the world. The 2 rivers that fed the Aral Sea were diverted to start a cotton industry in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and created this environmental crisis. In the process, the entire fishing industry collapsed here. It completely changed weather patterns, and is now a problem even more so because the cotton industry is also failing because they're running out of water to feed it. Let that run through one more time. And then reaction. So the final section of the book, thinking about what we are seeing now from Earth's natural systems because we've done so much, because all of this activity has released so much carbon into the atmosphere. So this is a pretty simple chart. Wanted to include just one, but it shows the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere going back to 800,000 BC. And they get this information by examining ice cores. And they're able to see exactly how much CO2 was, or roughly how much CO2 was in the air at the time. And, you know, to make this quite simple, we're off the charts right now because of all of our activity and because of all of the burning of fossil fuels that we've done. So what are we starting to see as a result of that? Here's an example of flooding in the Midwest in 2019, which was their wettest year on record. Millions of acres of crops were destroyed. This is at the Nebraska-Iowa border. I'll do that one more time. You can see even the highways here are submerged by water. And there are a few other examples in the book. I didn't want to go into too much detail today, but of fires, of course, which we know so much about in California, of droughts, of coral bleaching, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not all doom and gloom. I don't want this project to be kind of a newspaper of the apocalypse. I want to also use the platform that I've built to show how we're reacting to this problem. And I think it can be simplified into a couple simple ideas. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere, and there are problems like desertification. One of the best technologies that we currently have, probably the best technology that we have to remove carbon from the atmosphere, are these things called trees. This is the Great Green Wall of Africa around the Sahel region. So this is on the border with Senegal. And you can see this incredible effort to restore 250 million. This is not 250 million in this shot, but expansively 250 million acres of degraded land, and to create 350,000 rural jobs in the process. So I want to shine a spotlight on efforts like this that are underway that require significant investment if they're going to succeed. So we can take carbon out of the atmosphere through processes like this, and people are exploring other things like carbon capture, et cetera. And there are also, more efficient ways of creating the electricity that we need and creating the civilization that we want. What you can see here is a distribution center in Westmont, California, outside of Los Angeles. The roof here was not being used for anything. It was then converted into the second largest rooftop solar installation, second only to Apple's new headquarters in Cupertino, California. But you can see the roof transformed here, and now this area that wasn't doing anything energy-wise now powers, I believe, roughly 7,000 homes. So making use of this in a thoughtful way. So that is Timelapse, and that is all I have today. I want to leave just 10 minutes for Q&A. But I hope my work is very much connected to maps and very much inspires all of your own research and efforts and ideas. I've loved maps my entire life. I happen to go to a Montessori school, and at a Montessori school, you can do whatever you want for pretty much most of your studies. And I believe geography and playing with maps took about 90 to 95% of my time from first to third grade. So perhaps I was always destined to do something like this, but I just feel so lucky and so grateful that I have the ability each day to learn a bit more about the world, learn a bit more about our civilization, and hopefully have inspired some behavioral change and some new ideas and some new thinking in the process. So thank you all so much for your time, and would love to answer any questions that you have.
Ben, thank you so much. That was just terrific. You may not have seen it, but in the chat and in several private messages, people were gushing.
Thank you.
I think what we're going to do, we've only got 70 or so people here. If you want to type a question into the chat, go ahead. But if you also want to simply unmute yourself and ask, I'm probably going to give precedence to the people who want to unmute and ask, and we can have a more conversational kind of thing. So I'm going to open it up and see what happens.
Tom, I'll begin. Ben, this is Ron Gibbs. That was a spectacular presentation, and I marveled at your side-by-sides of Ellsworth Kelly and Clifford Still with your photographs. How did you ever conceive of that? That was marvelous.
Yeah, thank you. I don't remember the exact moment when I put together those slides. I think I was actually preparing for a show in Tel Aviv at the time, and the gallery operator that I was working with mentioned to me, he was like, you always talk about your work being like Mondrian or Ellsworth Kelly, like, why don't you actually find some examples? And what was interesting is that I didn't create those overviews with those particular pictures in mind, but when I was looking through those artists' body of work, found these ones that were just so similar, even compositionally. So I think what I realized in the beginning of the project is that when you look at the world from above, it becomes two-dimensional often. Besides that one picture that I showed of the Bay Area from an angle, you lose elevation when you look at the world directly from above. And this is my favorite art. Abstract expressionist art is kind of the art I was falling in love with when I lived in New York. And I think I was just so drawn to it and so familiar with it because I was going to museums every weekend looking at it, that was my instinct to connect those two things. The last thing I'll say, and this gets a little heady, but I'll try to conceptualize it. I think what's so interesting about these images, when you think about them from that art historical perspective, is I recognize that this abstract art is not for everyone, and people don't necessarily want to interpret what this means. But the fact that all of my images are real places that you can provide a description and a caption with to explain exactly what you're seeing, but they also operate on your experience artistically. I think it's cool that they can be viewed both as a piece of art, but also a piece of data that can teach you more about the planet. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Benjamin, hi, this is Eleanor. I want to thank you. This was an incredible presentation. 2 questions. What is your background? What did you study in college, and how did you get into this amazing career? And then what hangs behind you on the wall? Is that what map or what satellite picture is that? Thanks so much.
This is, yeah, thank you. So this is not my print. This is just a local artist, and it's like a canvas print. I don't have much of my stuff hanging in my house because I look at it so often that I try to keep it a little fresh. To your first question, what did I study? I studied history at Yale. I discovered art history a little late in my time there to make it my major, my focus, but started studying art history in the end of my junior year and my senior year of college at the urging of my sisters, who are both art history majors. But I think what's so fascinating about not only what I studied, but my interest, I think with this project, I was able to combine this love for environmentalism, art history, even my interest in social media and these new platforms that were emerging in 2013, photography, outer space, just kind of all wrapped into one. And I was able to focus on what I wanted to focus on, which I think gave me the inspiration to keep it going when I wasn't necessarily going to make any money from it. To call something daily overview, I often joke with my friends and my family now that by calling something daily overview, you commit yourself to literally doing something every single day for as long as this thing exists. So now there have been thousands of posts, but I've been lucky, I think, with that kind of need for diligence and commitment, that it's encouraged me to find so many different things and stick with it. And I think really that time and effort ultimately has made all of this possible. I don't know if you're all familiar with the painter Bob Ross, who I believe was on PBS, but he said talent is just continued interest. And I think about that a lot because by no means was I someone who thought of himself as creative or an artist or a photographer, but just found something that I really loved and was really excited about. And if you do something, every single day for 6 or 7 years, you're going to get pretty good at it. So yeah, I'm not sure if what I studied exactly prepared me for this, but I think in many ways it got me thinking about the world in an exciting way. So it probably did. Yeah.
Ben, this is Tom Paper. So Space Club.
Yeah.
Tell us what does that mean, and why did you start that?
Yeah. So I worked at this amazing brand consulting firm called Lippincott, and Space Club was appropriately called Lip Infinity. It was. I mean, I was just out of college. I think this was probably a year after I graduated from college, and people were pretty serious at work. Like everyone got their lunch and they went back to their cubicle and got down to work, and there wasn't as much socializing as I think I would have hoped. And I wanted to get to know my colleagues a bit better. And if you're in an office, you can't talk about religion, you can't talk about politics, but everyone can talk about outer space. It's fair game for all kinds of interesting things. And there were also some things that were happening at the time in the news. SpaceX was just starting to test rockets that it was landing. There was the meteorite event over Chelyabinsk, Russia, which was one of the largest in the last, I think, like 100 years at the time. I think Voyager left the solar system that year. So I was just like seeing these things happening and thought it would just be something interesting. And I think I tried to bring my own excitement to this gathering, and soon enough, like 10 or 15 people were coming to Space Club every couple of weeks. So.
But your work didn't have anything to do with space?
Zero. Yeah, we do like logo and visual system design for big companies. So I'm glad I didn't get fired. I think it was a potential recipe for my termination, but you know, it worked out. So yeah, changed my life forever.
I'm seeing a question in the chat from Ken Habib. Can you expand and/or reference trees, Palo Alto versus East Palo Alto, and other evidence of unequal landscapes?
Yeah, I think it's rare to find examples that are right next to each other. There are a few really good ones in India and South Africa of, you know, like beautiful upscale communities with swimming pools next to slums, which is just crazy to see it in one frame. Sometimes in other presentations, I like to do comparisons of, and in my book as well too, of just areas showing green space, like the suburbs of Copenhagen, where everyone has their own, you know, growing patch and cul-de-sac, versus an area like Delhi of India, where people are living without trees, just completely on top of each other. I'd love actually to share that image, because it's an image that's been on my mind very much this past week as we're learning about everything that's going on there. And you're dealing with a problem like COVID, where things are spreading easily between people who are in such close quarters. And I hope you can all see that now. Is that working, Tom?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is an image that I've done of, I believe it's, I don't know the exact name, Utnam Nagar, I believe is the particular
Delhi.
area of Delhi. Yeah, where this is what I've been thinking about. Like if you have, you know, probably 750,000 to 1 million people in this particular frame, there's just such incredible density that this doesn't look anything like, let me pull it up, the other example I was just mentioning. It's not going to work. You can imagine a green suburb in Denmark compared to this. Like you can count the number of trees in that one image. Just, I think in many ways, those examples have changed how I think about the world and changed the way I think about civilization. People often ask me, like, how has this changed your view of the world? And I often think about population numbers when you think about a city like Mexico City or Seoul or Tokyo that has, you know, nearly 30 million people, upwards of 30 million people. And then you go to look at that with the satellite. And I think that maybe is something that is interesting versus a map. When you look at the satellite, I think your brain can conceptualize and start to think, wow, there are 30 million people in that picture. And what does that mean? And all those people need food and energy, and they all go to the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. It's just kind of a mind-blowing thing, but I think it's powerful as we contemplate, you know, our civilization and what it's doing.
Then we have a question in the chat from Courtney about whether you do middle school talks for a younger age.
I do. Yeah, I happen to be the brother of a middle school principal outside Philadelphia. So some of my earliest talks were to a middle school audience, and you would think that might be easier, but they're actually a more difficult audience to impress. So I do it, but I really need to step my game up for it. So yeah.
Benjamin, I am now involved in three-dimensional mapping, and I have a number of maps on three-dimensional maps on flat surfaces. And I just noticed this Delhi map that you showed is really a three-dimensional map on a flat surface. And I wonder if you thought about doing a series on a book of three-dimensional maps on flat surfaces, because I think it would be fascinating.
Yeah, I have thought about something similar in this idea of using augmented reality. So there are certain companies that capture the world in 3D from multiple angles, and you can actually use like an app on your phone to turn a 2D image into something that raises up and there's elevation that comes with it. Kind of the idea of like a pop-up book, but you know, the 2021 edition. I'm not sure if I'm addressing specifically your question about the maps that you have. Are they like relief maps that have been cut out or something like that?
Oh, Len, you're muted. Len.
Yes, I collect relief maps both above ground, and now you can get them below ground. We have one of Lake Tahoe that has the depth.
Mhm.
I also collect simulated 3D on flat surfaces, and it's just become. I started out years ago with Holy Land maps from as back as 1450, which I still have. But I'm an OBGYN. I'm like in transition. I'm moving into the cutting edge. I do want to mention that my first aerial map was a gift from a patient who I had taken care of, who worked in the Goddard Space Center. And she made me an aerial map of Chesapeake Bay and where our home was. And that has really been unbelievably centering. And I think that's a very popular idea for commercialization.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great one for sure. Yeah, I love to see on the custom page that I made where all the people are creating maps and what areas have great meaning to them. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Those are fantastic ideas.
Ben, we have a question from Ed Delfs.
Ben, hey,
Okay.
excuse me. Hey, Ben, I'm here in San Francisco as well. And
Nice.
mine was related to a spectacular presentation, by the way, really just amazing. And mine was related to whether or not you give talks at school as well. I've got a high schooler. She's a junior in high school, and you know, they've been stuck in COVID and a lot of online learning. And this is really like across, you know, the artistic formats that you're using and the global changes and everything to do with the economy, and really spectacular. And I think it would be really inspirational for high school kids as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you give talks at high schools, and how would one, you know, connect the school, you with the school, or create a group to have you come in and inspire these kids?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I love sharing not only kind of the images themselves and the stories that go with them, but kind of my story of how this all came to be. I think I've certainly taken an unconventional career path, and to inspire the next generation of students and business people that you don't necessarily have to follow a particular trend or idea to carve out your own path, I think is a story I love to share. What I can do, I can just drop it in the chat right now, is just an email address that I will see these emails if they get sent here. And yeah, if anyone is curious about me giving a talk somewhere else, I'm happy to do so, to people young and old, anyone in between. So yeah, happy to
That's great. I've got a daughter who's both an artist and a kind of a budding entrepreneur herself. And so this is like an incredible sort of fit that might be super interesting. And Tom, is this recording is going to be available?
Yep. Yeah, recording will be on the California Map Society YouTube page, on the gallery, and we'll find a link on the California Map Society website.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
We've still got time for a couple more if anybody.
My hand's up.
Oh,
It's Fred.
okay. Yeah, hey, Fred.
Fabulous presentation. Thank you, Ben. Really extraordinary. Can you recommend any sites that go into more depth in describing the overview effect?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So the first thing that I would recommend is watching the film that I watched that introduced me to the idea. And I can drop that in the chat as well right now. It's just called Overview. It was made by these incredible filmmakers who I'm lucky to call friends now, called Planetary Collective. But that is certainly the first place I'd look. There are other books that have been written about it, but I think if you watch that film, it'll give you a very good starting point, and you might, you know, be drawn to a certain astronaut and their story from in the film. And that organization also did kind of a more substantial, longer film called Planetary 2. Planetary, not Planetary 2, just called Planetary. If you're interested in their work. I can't think of anything else at the moment, but that's definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, I'm a cartoonist, and I do cartoons of landscape and human form. And I work in
Cool.
an area called Don't Confuse Your Body with the Planet.
Okay.
And I look for mudras, in meditation to match the geology. I'd love to talk sometime and maybe swap some images.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you, Fred.
Ben, you have a custom way of producing 2D maps. Is there any thoughts about producing 3D versions, either real or virtual?
Yeah, great question. It is possible. Just recently started working with a San Francisco company called Mapbox on a few features. They just released basically a 3D imagery layer of everywhere in the world. And I might even be able to pull one up as an example if my computer cooperates here. But yeah, I think video has been an interesting transformation for me. The example I showed of San Francisco Airport, just one of many that I've done recently. And I wasn't prepared. I don't have this video on me. But yeah, kind of moving within the frame and kind of doing almost like a guided flight through 3D imagery is what I've been exploring. The idea I mentioned about augmented reality, I think, has a lot of potential to give people that experience where they can, move around an image or be kind of within an image, is something I'd love to do. I haven't necessarily been thinking about, installations or galleries as much because, we've all been at home and everything's gone virtual. So I think my work has adjusted accordingly. But I'm starting to, eye retail spaces and maybe think about doing a pop-up somewhere. And if so, I think 3D would be an interesting, cool part of it, just to lend something new to my story as well, to bring this incredible imagery to life. I feel like oftentimes these satellite companies or these mapping companies have such incredible storytelling potential, but that's not what they're in the business of doing necessarily. And if I can show up and say, I just saw that 3D layer you launched, I'd love to, make a book out of it or make an exhibition out of it. Are you down to collaborate? Oftentimes they've said yes, and that's made my work possible, that they've been willing to trust me enough to take this data and make it into a book or make it into something different than just data. So yeah, a long-winded answer, but yes, I would love to do more of that and thinking about it for sure.
Especially the virtual stuff can be interactive and immersive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if it's done the right way, it's great. Part of me is kind of a more classic mindset that I like things that are tangible, and I like to print things. And if I can get people off their screens and in front of a large canvas, that's better. But there are also things you can do with screens that you certainly can't do with paper. So you need both, I think. Yeah.
One more question I think we got time for.
Benjamin, it's such a huge amount of data to go through. Do you go through with specific questions, or do you explore just kind of randomly? Or
Yeah, I think because from the very beginning, the project had this kind of thesis of focusing on man-made things. It made it easier to do the searching, right? I think I also was forced to think about all of the possible ideas within this idea of what is man-made. So if I'm thinking about like posting a picture each day, I might show one airport a month and one agricultural development a week and one city a week and one port a week, and thinking about how to make the topics as varied as possible. There is a ton of research to go from, all of these, to look through all of these places and find the right one to show. And I think that's kind of an interesting decision based on what has a visual story, what might have a recent relevant story. For example, the Ever Given ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal, I did 3 posts on that the week it was stuck, just because it was so of the moment, and satellite imagery was kind of the medium that everyone was using to understand kind of the scale of the problem. So those posts always tend to do better if it's like a current event story. But I think an interesting resource that has also made this project possible is something like Wikipedia, where if I want to tell a story about solar energy, you can go to Wikipedia and find, a list, basically a database of the world's largest solar concentrators or solar panel facilities. And not only are you able to sort them by size, so, their capacity, which often leads to a better satellite image because it's bigger area, but they also all have geo coordinates listed next to the facility, which makes searching, significantly easier. That I'm not, on the map for an hour trying to find this facility, but I can plug it in and it goes right to it. And, it might not look good or it might be cloudy. So then you go to the next one. When I was showing those initial examples of the solar concentrator in Spain or the iron ore mine in Australia, those might have been, the 15th mine I looked at or the 10th solar concentrator I looked at before I found one that was super visual. And again, that goes back to the art historical examples. For whatever reason, I thought those ones, hit home or were just super visual and awesome. So it's a combination of many factors, I think. But yeah, to get back to your question, it's definitely pointed research and not just wildly optimistic that I'll stumble across something cool. But it has happened. That being said, it has. I like to want to go find something else, and you discover something along the way. So it's not all research. There's some luck involved as well too. So yeah.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much. This has just been terrific. You do have, I think, 3 questions in the chat. I'm going to let you answer those in the chat when we're as we move on here. And
thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone.
Again. Really appreciate it.